ladies and gentlemen. I'll introduce myself. Simon Labbett from Transport Research Laboratory, a UK-based organisation with an 80-year plus heritage. We were founded in 1933 by British government, and we were in fact a British government department. And back in 1933, the government recognised that the paper car was starting to cause a bit of a problem. We were killing in those days 7,500 people every year. We really didn't have that many cars on the network. So the government got a group of people together to look at the roads, to look at the vehicles that we were driving in, to look at the congestion that the vehicles were causing, and also to look at and start to regulate how we as drivers and road users start to use the vehicles. I've been here in the GCC since 2007 and been working with many of the government organisations supporting their work in doing very much the same things as TRL have done for the UK government. My part of the business is working in safety and investigations. And I collect some of these newspaper headlines from time to time. And we often say that the headline will say, this does not happen again. Prominent members of government will say, this is unacceptable. And in fairness, many of the GCC states have made great progress in establishing road safety strategies and starting to implement those strategies. Sadly, however, is when you see the headline, this does not happen again, you can almost guarantee that it will follow with another major crash and many loss of life within 3 to 6 months. And again, the same call happens again. But what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and actually who owns the problem? Now, I appreciate here we are at a vehicle modification conference, and it's very encouraging to see the amount of interest that is being developed on taking the stages of regulation and standards for our vehicles. I actually just want to take us back a stage and go back to basics. And before we can modify a vehicle, we really need to make sure that we've got the right platform in which to start. And are we adequately dealing with the safety issues? What are the consequences of mixing our standards? And we compare when it comes to our emission regulations and in relation to Europe, for example. And do we need to actually go back to basics? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some examples of some of the work that I've found as I've been around the region, some of the challenges that we face. That's a very pleasant picture taken from the Burj Khalifa, looking down on a landscape which is covered in low-hanging cloud, fog. Fog is a major safety issue for the UAE. Now, it may look very picturesque at this type of height. However, the operational environment down on the ground level is somewhat different. It's not a nice situation to be driving in. One of the strange things for me, having come from Europe and been working in Europe for very many years, is the fact that we do not specify high-intensity rear fog lights on our vehicles. We do in Europe, and there's a bizarre situation where you find some vehicles will have them fitted and other vehicles won't have them fitted. Yet we have a serious fog problem. Here, for example, in the picture, you can see all the vehicles have got lights on. Only one light is starting to shine through, and that's the lead vehicle, because the left-hand light of that one is indeed a high-intensity rear fog light. As benefit helps define the position of the vehicle to oncoming road users. Road authorities here are often talking about we need fog detection systems. Well, we've got the best fog detection system ever invented. It's called your eyes. We don't need to know that it's foggy, because when you get up in the morning, you you recognise it's foggy and you need to modify your driving accordingly. What we do need, however, is a better positioning of our vehicles and better clarity of our vehicles for oncoming drivers. Not the front fog lights I'm talking about the rear fog lights. So our situation we have is, let's take the Ford Motor Car company, making some very, very good, very professionally developed cars for the market. We have the bottom end, the entry type of the market with the Ford Fiestas and the Ford Focuses. Those are sourced from European sources, and as a consequence comply with European standards. They come complete with fog lights. At the other end of the Ford market, we have the Ford Explorer, much, much larger vehicle, with a brand new Ford Mustang. They don't have fog lights. You can't get fog lights fitted for these vehicles as a factory option, because these vehicles are sourced from North America, where the standards of fog lights are not required. One of the building blocks of regulation is vehicle classifications. And this is an extract taken from our federal law, number 21. In particular, I want us to start to have a look at the definitions of light vehicles. And in particular, here it's any vehicle reserved for transporting passengers or goods with a maximum weight not exceeding 2.5 tonnes. And you can see that the definition of a heavy vehicle relates to vehicles in excess of 2.5 tonnes, but that relates to the actual load that they're carrying goods. Let's also now look at the driving licence classification. And this one talks about the light vehicle driving licence for vehicles weighing no more than 2.5 tonnes and carrying no more than 14 passengers, excluding the driver in the case of passenger vehicles. So then you ask the question, so what's one of these? How do you classify it in terms of a vehicle classification? Because clearly its weight is greater than a light vehicle, so it doesn't sit in the light vehicle classification. So where does it sit? The answer is it doesn't sit neatly in our current vehicle classifications. If you can't classify it, it's very, very difficult for regulation. The next question is, what driving licence do you need to drive one of these? Because it's certainly not a light vehicle driving licence, because it's too heavy. Mirrors are an interesting issue that I've found as we've gone around with our compatibility issues. One of the vehicles that we often import are second-hand tractors of articulated trucks. One of the advantages of importing these from Europe is that the European standards come complete with a whole complex of different types of mirrors and different angles to look at the blind spots within the vehicles. We actually just need a plain mirror with the vehicles that are often operating on our roads. The problem, however, is whilst we may import second-hand European tractors with advanced mirror issues, it becomes a bit of a compatibility issue when we manufacture trailers without this specification. As a consequence, the trailer is now wider than the towing vehicle. What can the driver see? Well, sadly, the driver can only see the front end of the trailer that he's carrying, despite all the mirrors. The driver cannot see behind him. So we lack a compatibility in relationship to our tractors and our trailer widths and our trailer lengths. We have an incompatibility to European trucks against local trailers. I said I deal with the safety aspects, and sadly, I deal with many fatal crashes. I've been to lots of fatal crashes in and around the region. People say to me, that's a pretty ugly job to get involved in. Yes, it can be. My mission, however, is to make sure that we learn from these crashes, we reduce the level of accidents. And that's the motivation to be involved in trying to understand death and injury on our roads. Well, let's look inside one of these vehicles. That was a mid-range bus carrying passengers. And one of the things that you can see fairly immediately in this, what was a relatively low-speed crash, was that many of the seats collapsed. And this is a seat that it's at the front of the vehicle, yet the impact occurred at the back of the vehicle. Many occupants were seriously injured as a consequence of these seats failing. Again, relating directly to what Professor Bushman was saying earlier on about seat anchorages. A very, very valid point that I will start to pick up on now. The seats were fitted with seatbelts, and the seatbelts were very securely anchored to the seats. The seats, however, were not anchored to the floor. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Here you can see the bolt that bolts the seat through, but you can see it's pulled through the floor of the vehicle. It hasn't broken, it's just pulled through the floor. Why would that be the case? It would be the case because it was a plywood floor. We didn't have the correct anchorages in place to secure that vehicle. The challenge for us here is that this vehicle was manufactured by a very prominent Japanese manufacturer. All of the components, including the supply of the seatbelts, were manufactured in that Japanese factory. They were aftermarket fittings. This is the typical layout of a 30-seat bus, and you can see there's some seats which are fitted to the side of the seat that fold down. Also, I'd like to draw attention to the front passenger seat. The front passenger seat was fitted with a 2-point lap belt. Not a 3-point belt, as you would expect, but a 2-point belt. This is what the vehicle looks like, looking along the aisleway. However, when the seats are put down, the gangways are completely blocked. There is only one door out, there is no emergency accesses. And I am aware that, having raised this issue, in fairness to ESMA here, we have banned the use of these drop-down seats in these vehicles. Unfortunately, there are still vehicles running around the UAE that have the seats in this configuration. I also saw last week when I was in Oman that school buses use vehicles in this configuration. It's extremely dangerous because how are you going to get the occupants out in the case of a serious crash and the vehicle is on fire? This is a work bus. It carries around about 87 passengers on a single day. This is the configuration of the work bus, door on the front, and at the rear of the vehicle we have another emergency access door. This vehicle was manufactured in this condition, complete with a seat that sits across the emergency exit, manufactured at a factory plant in that condition. Outside the vehicle, we have a handle where you, or a glass panel, where you break glass and you can open the door from the outside. No, you can't. Because also fitted at the factory is a deadlock bolt immediately inside the vehicle that is supplied from the manufacturer to this market as a standard fitment. We're not even talking here about a vehicle modification. We're talking about a vehicle that is imported in this condition. It's extremely dangerous. And it's not just this vehicle that is fitted with these deadlock bolts. So what was the manufacturer's view? I asked, in fairness, they did respond to me. So with the passenger seat belt, the 2-point rather than the 3-point belt, the question I asked was, are there any technical reasons why the front passenger seat could not be fitted with an appropriate 3-point seat belt as a standard fitment? Manufacturer replied, these 3-point seat belt, the 3-point seat belt is not required by the regulation. Also, the current specification 2-point seat belt type satisfies the regulation. Manufacturer knows that greater injury will occur to a passenger in the front seat of the vehicle with a 2-point belt, not a 3-point belt. I then talked about the central seating condition. What are your thoughts regarding the potential safety issues caused by the use of central aisle seats in a fully loaded vehicle? Vehicle conforms to current GSO regulation. And then finally, I asked the question of the manufacturer of the emergency door access. What do you consider are the safety implications regarding factory fit of the internal wall that prevents the effective operation of an external emergency access panel. The manufacturer did not wish to require. Can we compare with we've got a note announcement. If it relates to any of us here, we've got a bit of a problem. It's a very fancy card, looks like a Bentley here. The registration is 8971. It needs to be moved if it's anybody in this room very, very urgently, otherwise sadly it's going to be removed, as I understand. I didn't look to see if I had a phone line on it. So how do we compare with our emission standards? We want to be amongst the leading countries. Well, we've got work to do in this area. Typically, our petrol-driven vehicles are equivalent to Euro 1, Euro 2 at best. Our heavy goods vehicles are in the region of Euro 1. Well, these are the standards that were set by Europe some 20 years ago. And it was a bit of an exponential curve. And where we are at the moment is at the top end of that exponential curve, whilst Europe has sort of come down and now trying to squeeze the last out of what we can get from reducing our emissions. An area that we've got some work to do on. So I'll come back to the original slide I put up. Okay, my job here is to reduce casualties. We've got road authorities that are doing their best with developing and delivering road safety strategies. But vehicle safety is an area that we are finding that we're falling behind. Road authorities in the UAE don't have the ability to change the federal laws. They don't have the ability to change the federal standards. And they can only do so much. And clearly, what's fairly evident to us is the fact that by showing evidence of real-world performance, we aren't quite as good as we thought we were. And whilst I'm very, very pleased to see that we're talking about regulation of modification vehicles, it's very evident that we do have gaps in our baseline. So what have we got to do before we get things right? Well, road safety has been compromised by shortfalls in standards and regulations and legislation. We have compatibility issues. We have not yet addressed local challenges. And we need to guard against the belief that we are working on solutions. What are the recommendations that we need to be thinking about? Road safety requires better vehicle standards, better vehicle regulations, better legislation. We must ensure we have compatibility in our standards that we import into the country. We need to establish and understand what's actually going on in the real world, understand the real world performance of these vehicles. We need to set local standards for local issues. And we need to take responsibility, but we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Simon, for your presentation. We'll be heading to the coffee break in a couple of minutes. Are there any questions you'd like to ask before we head to the coffee session, which, by the way, is only 5 minutes? And please bring your coffee and come back so we don't get too late on the schedule. Please, Mr. Walid.
Yes, actually, it's a kind of comment about this presentation. We are in GSO, of course, have a regulation adapted, as I said, from different regions. And we cover all those points that have been raised in this presentation. I will give an example of the evacuation exits for the buses, because it's upon to the kind of use of these buses. We have a regulation for that. For the public transportation, actually, we have a regulation that for the minimum passengers, they should have one door for the person that can be carried out by those buses. If it's more than 25, that means they have to have two doors. But for the emergency evacuation exit for the buses, actually it is allowed for the manufacturer to use the large windows and to be provided with a certain hammer to be capable to be opened when they are evacuated. On the other side, that when these special use of buses being used for school, yes, it is a must to have two doors, one for each size. It should be freely can be movement by the passengers. The other point you mentioned is related to those minibuses, and I believe so that such minibuses being modified locally. Some of these minibuses actually are designed to be cargo vehicles, not buses targeting to transport persons. And because of that, some of the local or workshops, they provide the vehicles with these seats, and because of that, there is a failure or non-conformity for those seats. Generally, of course, the most important part for conformity assessment is the feedback. If there is any violence of regulations, or if there is any non-conformity vehicles, it is really very important for us as a GSO to have this feedback, to know about these accidents. We ask the GCC countries to report any failure of conformity, and if there is any risk that being noticed in the vehicles being marketed in the region. And we have solved many cases like these, and believe me that the manufacturers will be punished, and who will violate the safety of people will have taken a very strong position from our side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to raise the issue there about the seat belts on that vehicle. The vehicle was manufactured in Japan at a Japanese factory. It was not retrofitted with any of those things. That vehicle came from the Japan factory. With regard to the hammer, yes, I can appreciate that that would be a good issue. However, on the vehicle that I was looking at, no hammers were provided and the windows were barred. So whilst you may have the right regulations or the standards in place, real world, and that's what I'm telling you about, is where we have the experiences, the real world performance is different to what you ideally are trying to achieve. There's a gap between where we are to what we're supplying on the roads.
We ran out of time again. Thanks, Labbett, for your presentation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. We're heading now to the coffee break, which, like I said, will only be 5 minutes. So please feel free to bring your coffee and your cheese.